Iron Man, directed by Jon Favreau, is a 2008 film that marked the beginning of the MCU. Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist, is making his fortune selling weapons to parties all across the world. But one day he's ambushed in Afghanistan during a weapons demonstration he's doing for the US government. He's held hostage and being forced to make a missile against his will. Tony Stark must find a way to escape his captivity in Afghanistan and hopefully sort out some wrong moves his company has made as well. In the meantime, Tony seeks to become a new protector after the horrors he's seen. As he makes the first Iron Man suit, he becomes the MCU's first superhero. Alright, so I've been meaning to review some of the older Marvel movies, and also some of the older Star Wars movies at that, because sadly there's still plenty of them that I haven't actually had the chance to review yet. My goal was to have them all reviewed eventually at some point, but with how many movies that are released and how many awesome requests you guys send my way, it'll just take a while. We'll just play it by ear and see what happens. Regardless though, it seemed like Iron Man was a great place to start, considering it actually kicked off the MCU, and is generally considered by most to be one of its top films. When I rewatched it the other night, I was definitely impressed, and I totally see why it's considered one of the best the MCU has to offer. I currently have it as the number 8 film in my rankings, which is probably going to be considered too low by a lot of fans, but just know that I really do love it, and I'm going to give it a high score. There's just a lot of good movies to choose from in the MCU now. Iron Man had an incredibly difficult task of kickstarting the MCU. The film not only had to deliver a compelling story in its own right, but it also had to lay the groundwork for literally everything else that was yet to come. Robert Downey Jr. has been viewed as the face of the MCU for 10 years now, and rightly so. He's the biggest star, he was the first superhero to show up, and his character is incredibly likable despite all those flaws. Every Iron Man movie is carried quite a bit on the back of Robert Downey Jr. His performance has just become so iconic that he's embodied this character. And when you think of Iron Man, you can't think of anyone else in the role, and that's when you know the actor nailed it. I think what this specific film does for the character of Tony Stark is pretty remarkable. In the beginning, he's extremely flawed and even unlikable. He's a protagonist that's more of a difficult character to root for, at the start at least, than most have been up to this point. He's selfish, he's immature, he's rude. He's most of the things that we don't like in our superheroes. Though once he goes through that traumatic experience of being held captive, his entire perspective changes. He's able to see the damage his weapons cause, and he's able to see that he was doing more harm to the world than good. After this, he becomes an entirely different person, a character that the audience can root for, who does things that protect people, not put them in harm's way. He still has that sarcastic, immature attitude, but he begins to put his talents to good use, which is something that leads him to a more likable path, despite all his flaws. Tony Stark is a character that sometimes can be difficult to handle because he's so stubborn, but despite that, he remains a fan favorite because he's charismatic, he's incredibly intelligent, and ultimately we know that he has a good heart as an audience member. He has personality, and he also has plenty of gifts that make him exceptional and interesting. Iron Man 1 establishes all of those things because Tony is constantly one-upping his foes. He's coming up with ways to outsmart them, he's clever in ways that a lot of heroes just aren't, and it's those gifts combined with his unique personality that make him so likable. All of that is established in this first film, and it does a remarkable job doing it in just this one. The other two Iron Man films are sort of more the same, I'd say. There's not much in them that added too much to the character of Tony Stark. The first one, however, not only introduces the character, but develops him the most out of any solo film easy. I also like that this feels more like a grounded Marvel film than most of the others do. Tony Stark finds himself in an active war zone, and he's dealing with the repercussions of war profiteering that have negative consequences for a lot of people, even innocent ones. He's forced to see firsthand how his weapons are being used, and it ain't pretty. I like that this Iron Man wasn't afraid to go a little bit grittier, a little bit darker than many of the other Marvel films. It just feels a little bit more unrefined, which I think is a good thing in this case. It doesn't feel as formulaic, it doesn't have that Marvel tried and true formula, which is refreshing in hindsight. What I also like was that the stakes feel real as well. There's a main villain that reveals themselves here, and even though it's been 10 years since the movie came out, I won't say the name of this person and this villain. Either way, this is a villain that feels realistic and true. This isn't a super complex villain like Loki or Thanos or Killmonger, but I found the realism of their motivations and their overall mindset to help ground the story when necessary, something that was actually a really nice touch in this film. This isn't one of the best Marvel villains, but it's certainly one of the better ones, and I felt that it fit well within the scope of this story. In terms of what I didn't like, I felt the film drags a little bit in the first act. The problem is that this time is pretty necessary for the direction the story ultimately heads. You need to spend time with Tony Stark in captivity, and you need to see the harsh realities that exist because of the careless weapon manufacturing that he took a part in. The problem to me is that there's almost too much Tony Stark and not enough Iron Man. I mentioned that I love Tony Stark, and we all do, but there is a point where the superhero stuff actually needs to shine through. That excitement needs to be there. It definitely is there. It just takes its time getting there, maybe a little bit too slowly. But when the action does arrive, it's great. I think there are a few great scenes in this film, and one really iconic one. The one where he shows up in Afghanistan with the Mark III suit and just wrecks everyone. That's still one of my favorite scenes and an all-time great Marvel scene. I didn't find anything incredibly dated about this film from an action perspective. I found it to be exciting, fun, and thrilling even 10 years later, which is nothing to scoff at. Looking back at Iron Man though, I think it's worth considering how much pressure was on this film. If it sucked, I don't think you'd see the MCU in the state it's in today. The MCU was at least partially built on the success of Iron Man 1, and it's important to remember that something grand always has to have a starting point. For the MCU, it's Iron Man, and it's an excellent superhero film that plays to the strengths of the character while at the same time providing a more gritty superhero film. But let's take a look at the pros and cons as we wrap up. As for the pros, I thought Iron Man delivers a gritty superhero story, an exceptional performance and leading character, some great action even 10 years later, and a solid villain that fits very well within the scope of this story. As for the cons, just some aspects of the first act that felt a little too slow for me. Overall, I'm going to give Iron Man a 9.5 out of 10 and definitely recommend you go back and watch this one if you haven't already. If you have, give it another rewatch. It's worth it. So have you guys seen Iron Man? What did you think of it? And if not, let me know why not. And also let me know your favorite Phase 1 Marvel movie. For me, it's definitely Avengers. I love the first Avengers a ton. It's my second favorite Marvel movie so far. But if you favor another, let me know in the comments below. Remember, your Phase 1 choices are Iron Man 1 and 2, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, and Avengers. Those are your choices, and there are all some pretty good ones there. Either way, this is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next one.